Welcome everyone, join us today as we step into the captivating world of Nico, the German singer-songwriter behind the iconic Velvet Underground. So let's dive in. Nico, born Christa Pafkin on the 16th of October 1938, in Cologne, Germany, to Wilhelm and Marguerite Pafkin. Her father was born into the affluent Pafkin-Kolsch master brewer family in Cologne, steeped in Catholic tradition, while her mother hailed from a more humble background, adhering to Protestant faith. When Nico was just 2, she, her mother, and grandfather sought refuge from the ravages of World War II by relocating to the serene surroundings of the Spreewald forest outside Berlin, leaving behind the turmoil of Cologne's bombardments. Nico's father was conscripted into the Wehrmacht at the war's outset. Conflicting accounts surround his fate. One suggests he was critically wounded by a French sniper in 1942 and euthanized by his commanding officer. Another narrative suggests he sustained severe head injuries, leading to lifelong institutionalization. Unverified rumors abound, suggesting he perished in a concentration camp or succumbed to shell shock. In 1946, Nico and her mother settled in downtown Berlin, where her mother worked as a seamstress. Nico attended school until age 13, then began selling lingerie at the prestigious department store Car de Oui, securing modeling gigs in Berlin. Standing at 5 feet 10 with striking features and pale skin, Nico quickly gained fame as a teenage fashion model. At 15, while temping for the US Air Force, she alleged a sexual assault by an American sergeant, leading to his court-martial after Nico testified. The incident, referenced in her song Secret Side, faces debate among biographers like Richard Witts due to lack of documented public records. Nico's discovery at 16 by photographer Herbert Tobias during a Car de Oui fashion show in Berlin marked the beginning of her successful modeling career. Tobias bestowed upon her the name Nico, after filmmaker Nikos Papadakis, whom he admired, and she adopted it permanently. She relocated to Paris, where she worked for various fashion magazines including Vogue, Tempo, and Elle. During this period, she transitioned her brown hair to blonde, citing inspiration from Ernest Hemingway. At 17, she was hired by Coco Chanel for promotional work but instead abandoned the job and fled to New York City. Her extensive travels enabled her to master English, Spanish, and French languages. In 1959, Nico had an uncredited speaking role in Mario Lanza's final film, For the First Time. During the same year, she caught the attention of renowned director Federico Fellini while on the set of La Dolce Vita, leading to a minor role in the film as herself. By then, she had relocated to New York and was studying acting under Lee Strasberg, in the same class as Marilyn Monroe. Following a part in the 1961 film, A Man Named Rocker, starring Jean-Paul Belmondo, Nico graced the cover of jazz pianist Bill Evans' 1962 album, Moonbeams. Balancing her time between New York and Paris, she secured the lead role in Jacques Poitrinard's Striptease in 1963. She also recorded the title track, penned by Serge Gainsbourg, which remained unreleased until 2001 when it was featured in the compilation album, Le Cinéma de Serge Gainsbourg. In New York, Nico crossed paths with Greek filmmaker Nico Papadakis, whose name she had adopted as her stage name. The pair shared a residence from 1959 to 1961. Intrigued after hearing her singing voice, Papadakis encouraged her musical pursuits and arranged for her initial singing lessons. In 1965, Nico encountered the Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones, leading to an introduction to Stones manager Andrew Loog Oldham. This connection resulted in her debut record for his immediate label, a single titled, I'm Not Sayin', a Gordon Lightfoot song, on the A-side and The Last Mile, on the B-side, produced by Jimmy Page. Actor Ben Carruthers facilitated her meeting with Bob Dylan in Paris that summer, and by 1967, Nico had recorded Dylan's song, I'll Keep It With Mine, for her inaugural album, Chelsea Girl. Dylan paid tribute to Nico with the song, Visions of Joanna, on his album Blonde on Blonde. Later, he introduced her to Andy Warhol, who then featured her in his and Paul Morrissey's experimental films in New York, such as Chelsea Girls, The Closet, Sunset, and Imitation of Christ. Legend has it that Nico expressed her desire to sing to Andy Warhol, who then introduced her to his latest protégés, the Velvet Underground. Initially hesitant due to personal and musical concerns, the band reluctantly accepted Warhol's suggestion to incorporate Nico as a chanteuse. They became the focal point of Warhol's multimedia performance, The Exploding Plastic Inevitable, which featured music, lighting, film, and dance. Nico provided lead vocals on 3 tracks, Femme Fatale, All Tomorrow's Parties, I'll Be Your Mirror, and backing vocals on Sunday Morning, for the band's debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico in 1967. Nico's time with the Velvet Underground was fraught with personal and musical challenges. John Cale, the band's multi-instrumentalist, noted Nico's lengthy dressing room preparations and pre-performance candle-burning ritual, which often delayed shows and irked songwriter Lou Reed. Nico's partial deafness occasionally led her off-key, leading to ridicule from other band members. There were concerns about her overshadowing the band with her captivating presence, and tensions with Reed and Cale, something Warhol loved to witness, which ultimately led to her departure. Despite these struggles, the album they created together became a classic, later ranked 13th on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time, though it initially received a lukewarm reception. Following her time with the Velvet Underground, Nico embarked on a solo career, performing regularly at the Dome in New York City with various guitarists, including members of the Velvet Underground, Tim Hardin, Tim Buckley, and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. But most often with 16-year-old Jackson Browne, which she lived with for a while, recording several of the young songwriter's early compositions in 1967. Her debut album, Chelsea Girl, featured songs by Bob Dylan, Tim Hardin, and Jackson Browne, among others. Velvet Underground members Lou Reed, John Cale, and Sterling Morrison contributed to the album, co-writing one song with Nico, It Was a Pleasure Then. Produced by Tom Wilson, the album had a traditional chamber folk sound with strings and flute arrangements, much to Nico's disappointment. She felt her creative vision was compromised, particularly by the excessive use of flutes, stating, "The first time I heard the album, I cried, and it was all because of the flute." During her time in California, Nico befriended Jim Morrison of The Doors, who encouraged her to write her own songs. In 1968, Nico released The Marble Index, where she took full creative control, writing both lyrics and music. With John Cale's arrangements, featuring a variety of folk and classical instruments, Nico's harmonium became her signature sound. This marked a departure from her previous work, adopting a classical-cum-European folk sound. The album also saw Nico's radical change in appearance, transitioning to red hair and donning a predominantly black wardrobe, setting a visual precedent for the emerging gothic rock scene. A promotional film for Evening of Light featured Nico alongside Iggy Pop of the Stooges. In the early 1970s, Nico returned to live performing, playing harmonium and giving concerts in Amsterdam and London, where she and John Cale opened for Pink Floyd. A one-off reunion of Nico, Cale, and Lou Reed took place at the Bataclan in Paris in 1972. Nico released two more solo albums during this decade, Desert Shore in 1970, and The End in 1974, where she wrote the music, sang, and played the harmonium. Cale produced and played most of the other instruments on both albums. The End featured Brian Eno on synthesizer and Phil Manzanera on guitar from Roxy Music. Nico's performance of The Doors' The End, at the Rainbow Theatre in London led to the creation of The End, later that year. During the 1970s, Nico collaborated extensively with French director Philippe Garrel, appearing in about 7 of his films and contributing music to several of them. She met Garrel in 1969 and became a central figure in his cinematic and personal circles. Nico's acting debut with Garrel was in his 1972 film, La Cicatrice Intérieure, where she also provided the music. Their collaboration continued with films like Anna Thor in 1972 and Un Ange Passé in 1975. Nico's involvement with Garrel extended to supplying music and appearing in his silent feature, Les Hautes Solitudes in 1974, and Le Berceau de Cristal in 1976. She also performed at Tangerine Dream's concert at Reims Cathedral in 1974. During this period, Nico formed a close relationship with Berliner musician Lutz Ulbrich, guitarist for Ash Ra Temple, who accompanied her on guitar at many of her concerts. However, her relationship with Island Records soured, leading to her being dropped from their roster in 1975. In September 1978, Nico performed at the Canet Rock 78 festival in Spain, alongside Blondie, Kevin Ayers, and Ultravox. During a recording session in Barcelona, she contributed vocals to Neuronium's album, Vuelo Químico, reading excerpts from Edgar Allan Poe's Ulalume. Nico briefly toured as a supporting act for Susie and the Banshees, and Patti Smith replaced her stolen harmonium in Paris. Returning to New York in 1979, Nico received positive reviews for her comeback concert at CBGB with John Cale and Lutz Ulbrich. She began playing regularly at venues like the Squat Theatre with Jim Tisdall. They embarked on a sold-out tour of 12 cities in the Eastern Midwest, sometimes accompanied by Cheetah Chrome on guitar. In France, Nico collaborated with photographer Antoine Giacomoni for her next album, Drama of Exile, released in 1981 and produced by Philippe Quilicini. The album featured a blend of rock and Middle Eastern arrangements, including covers of the Velvet Underground's I'm Waiting for the Man, and David Bowie's Heroes. After moving to Manchester in the early 1980s, Nico teamed up with Factory Records' Alan Wise as her manager and performed with various backing bands, including Blue Orchids, the Bedlamites, and The Faction. In 1981, she released Sita and Vegas, produced by Philippe Quilicini. The following year, she collaborated with Martin Hannett and the Invisible Girls for the single, Procession, featuring a new version of the Velvet Underground's All Tomorrow's Parties. Touring with post-punk band Blue Orchids in 1982, Nico influenced the emerging gothic rock scene. She performed with Bauhaus and the Sisters of Mercy, among others. She also appeared at the Futurama Festival alongside the Damned and Dead or Alive. Later, she worked with musical arranger James Young and his band The Faction. Live compilations like 1982 Tour Diary and En Person and Europe were released, capturing her performances across Europe. In 1985, Nico recorded her final solo album, Camera Obscura, with The Faction, James Young and Graham Didds, produced by John Cale. The album featured her rendition of My Funny Valentine, and closed with an updated version of Koenig. A music video for My Heart Is Empty was filmed at the Fridge in Brixton. She continued to tour extensively, performing across Europe, Japan, and Australia with The Faction or the Bedlamites. Several of her later performances were recorded and released, including Heroine, Nico in Tokyo, and Behind the Iron Curtain. In March 1988, Nico and Young collaborated with guitarist Henry Olsen to compose new songs, drawing inspiration from Egyptian music and singer Kalthoum. They premiered the new material at a festival in Berlin, where they performed Nico's classic, You Forget to Answer, From the End. Nico's final studio recording was a duet with Mark Arman titled Your Kisses Burn, released posthumously on Arman's album, The Stars We Are. A recording of her 1988 Berlin concert, titled Nico's Last Concert, Fata Morgana, was also released after her death. Personally, on August 11, 1962, Nico gave birth to her son, Christian Aaron Boulogne, known as Ari. His biological father was French actor Alain Delon, although Delon consistently denied paternity, which was not proven. Nico's maternal responsibilities were lacking, as she reportedly took LSD while pregnant and led a nomadic lifestyle, dragging her child along. Ari spent his infancy in New York's Andy Warhol's factory, exposed to drugs and adult environments. At age 4, he ingested pills, mistaking them for candy. Eventually Ari was raised by Alain Delon's parents due to Nico's inability to care for him. In 1965, she terminated a pregnancy in London during a brief affair with Brian Jones. Nico struggled with heroin addiction for over 15 years, with accounts of her troubled behavior recounted in Songs They Never Play on the Radio, by James Young, a member of her 1980s band. Ari, her son, also fell into heroin addiction after running away from his adoptive parents at 17 to join Nico. Following Nico's death, Ari battled addiction and psychiatric issues, intermittently working as an actor and photographer under the name Ari Pafkin. In 2001, he authored a book about his relationship with his mother, titled L'amour n'oublie jamais, Love Never Forgets. Tragically, he succumbed to a drug overdose in Paris in 2023 at the age of 60. In her last years, Nico resided in the Prestwich and Salford area of Greater Manchester, grappling with addiction but rekindling her passion for music. During the 1980s, she briefly lived in Brixton, London, sharing an apartment with punk poet John Cooper Clarke, though not romantically involved. Prior to her passing, Nico made efforts to address her addiction, opting for methadone replacement therapy and adopting a regimen of bicycle exercise and healthy eating. On July 17, 1988, during a holiday in Ibiza with her son Ari, Nico suffered a fatal accident when she fell off her bicycle and hit her head. Despite being found unconscious by a passing taxi driver, she faced difficulty in receiving prompt medical attention. Initially misdiagnosed with heat exposure as the weather was extremely hot, she was later discovered to have suffered a severe cerebral hemorrhage, leading to her passing at 2000 hours. Her son later recounted the events of that day, describing her departure on her bike in the early afternoon, never to return. She was 49 years old. Nico's cremated remains were interred in her mother's plot at Grunewald, a forest cemetery in Berlin. At her funeral, friends played a tape of Mutterlein, a song from her album Desert Shore. And there you have it. As we conclude our exploration into the life of Nico, we reflect on the enduring influence of this remarkable artist. From her haunting vocals to her profound contributions to the avant-garde music scene, Nico's legacy continues to inspire generations of artists and fans alike. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more musical icons just like this. Take care and bye for now.